January 1943. Inside a sun-drenched villa in Casablanca, the destiny of the Western world is being negotiated behind closed doors. Yet the most explosive conversation isn't about borders or treaties, but about a single, volatile man. General Dwight D. Eisenhower watches nervously as Winston Churchill prepares to meet George S. Patton, a commander so aggressive and unpredictable that he threatens to shatter the fragile alliance between two empires, forever changing the nature of modern command. The Casablanca Conference, and codenamed Operation Symbol, stands as a pivotal moment in the global struggle against the Axis powers, where the leaders of the free world must decide the next crushing blow against the Nazi machine. While the official agenda focuses on the unconditional surrender of Germany and the upcoming invasion of Sicily, a deeper, more personal drama unfolds in the private quarters of the British Prime Minister. Winston Churchill, a man who lives and breathes the romanticism of history, finds himself captivated by the whispered legends of an American tank commander who seems to have stepped out of the pages of an ancient epic. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, feels the heavy weight of responsibility as he prepares to introduce his most brilliant but most troublesome subordinate to the line of Britain. He knows that George S. Patton is a tactical genius without equal in the armored divisions of the United States, yet he also recognizes that Patton is a man who possesses no filter between his prehistoric warrior instincts and his modern military tongue. Eisenhower shifts uncomfortably in his chair while Churchill puffs rhythmically on a thick cigar, the blue smoke swirling around them like the fog of war that they are desperately trying to pierce. Churchill begins the inquiry with a sharp glint in his eye, asking Eisenhower to describe this General Patton who is being considered for the critical corps command in the upcoming assault on Sicily. Eisenhower describes George as a complicated and brilliant tactician, a fearless leader whose men worship the ground he walks on, but who remains perpetually insubordinate and plagued by a temper that consistently invites disaster. When Churchill asks if the man is truly good, Eisenhower does not hesitate to declare him the best armored commander in the American arsenal, and perhaps the finest in the entire world. This admission hangs in the air, a stark contrast to the cautious, methodical approach favored by many of the British high command who have been battered by 3 years of relentless conflict. Churchill has spent the previous weeks poring over intelligence reports from the North African campaign, noting the impressive speed and violence with which Patton's forces dismantled German resistance, yet the stories of the man's abrasive personality have also reached his ears. Eisenhower admits that the rumors are likely true, portraying Patton as a man who is as much a liability as he is an asset, a commander who refuses to play the political games required by a coalition war. Despite these warnings, or perhaps because of them, Churchill announces his absolute necessity to meet this American phenomenon before any final command assignments are etched in stone. He realizes that if Patton is to lead troops alongside British forces, he must personally take the measure of the man's soul to see if his fire will illuminate the path to victory or simply burn down the house of the alliance. Eisenhower warns the Prime Minister that George is utterly unpredictable and often speaks when silence would be the wiser course, to which Churchill grins broadly, stating that he has been called unpredictable his entire life and rather enjoys those who have the courage to speak their minds. 2 hours later, the atmosphere on the villa's terrace transforms as General George S. Patton arrives, looking every bit the archetype of the professional soldier in his full-dress uniform. His medals are polished to a mirror sheen, his famous pearl-handled revolvers gleam in the Moroccan sun, and his boots reflect the world around him with startling clarity as he snaps a perfect, rigid salute. Churchill studies Patton with the practiced intensity of a statesman who has spent decades deciphering the true intentions. He immediately tests the general's intellect by asking which historical conqueror he admires most, to which Patton replies without a second of hesitation that Alexander the Great is his primary inspiration. Patton argues that Alexander understood how speed and audacity could overcome superior numbers by leading from the front, a philosophy that many modern theorists would label as reckless for a high-ranking officer. The tension rises when Patton bluntly declares that those who find leading from the front to be reckless are simply wrong, a statement that causes Eisenhower to tense up in anticipation of a diplomatic incident. Instead of taking offense, Churchill laughs with the genuine appreciation of a fellow warrior, finding Patton's bluntness to be a refreshing change from the sanitized reports of his own staff. The Prime Minister then tosses a loaded question into the arena, asking if Patton believes the Allies are prosecuting the war correctly, to which Patton ignores Eisenhower's warning glares and answers with a resounding no. He asserts that the Allied strategy is far too cautious and that they should be attacking everywhere at all times because they possess the resources to overwhelm the enemy if only they have the will to use them. Churchill reminds the American general that the British have been fighting since 1939 and have learned the price of caution through bloody experience and devastating losses. Patton counters with respect, but firm conviction, stating that caution kills soldiers just as surely as recklessness, because a defensive posture allows the enemy to choose the time and place of the encounter. He explains that an offensive posture keeps the opponent off balance, and even when outnumbered, the attacker can choose where to concentrate their forces, while the defender is forced to react to the momentum of the strike. Churchill acknowledges that Patton is advocating for the exact opposite of current British military strategy, a realization that makes several British officers in the room look visibly offended. The Prime Minister grins and asks Eisenhower where he found such a man, to which Eisenhower weakly responds that Patton found himself, and that his only job is to point him toward the enemy. Churchill turns back to the general, remarking that he is either brilliant or insane, to which Patton cleverly replies that he has been told the two are often the same thing. This exchange cements a strange and immediate bond between the two men, leading Churchill to declare that he likes Patton because he reminds him of himself 40 years ago. This recognition is profound because it bypasses the bureaucratic layers of the war machine and connects two individuals who view conflict not as a series of logistical problems, but as a clash of wills in a pursuit of historical glory. As the formal meeting concludes and the sun begins to set over Casablanca, Churchill asks Eisenhower to remain behind for a private assessment of the man they have just encountered. Eisenhower sighs and reiterates that while Patton is the best field commander anyone could hope for, he remains the greatest headache in his entire command structure. He explains that George ignores orders he disagrees with, refuses to coordinate with other units, and takes risks that would get any other officer court-martialed. He describes Patton as crude, profane, and offensive, a man who has already been formally reprimanded 3 times for his conduct. Churchill nods slowly, recognizing the pattern of the brilliant but impossible officer, a type of leader he has encountered many times throughout his long and storied political career. The question then becomes whether Patton's undeniable brilliance is worth the immense trouble he causes for the higher command and the political stability of the alliance. Eisenhower admits that when he needs the impossible to be achieved, George is the only person he trusts to actually deliver the result, regardless of the cost to his own nerves. Churchill is quiet for a long moment before delivering a shock to Eisenhower, stating that Patton is a pure warrior and likely the last of his kind in an age that is rapidly becoming industrial and mechanical. He observes that while modern warfare is increasingly fought with spreadsheets, logistics, and methodical planning, Patton fights with the instinct and aggression of the ancient world. Churchill challenges Eisenhower by asking if he would send his most careful and methodical commander to break through enemy lines, or if he would send the man sitting in the other room. Eisenhower has no answer because he knows that in the moment of crisis, the human heart and the individual's will to win are more important than any tactical manual ever written. Churchill labels Patton an anachronism, a man born out of time, but he insists that he is their anachronism and that there will be many times in the coming years when they will need a man who fights with his heart instead of his head. Eisenhower corrects him by saying Patton fights with both, which makes him the most effective and dangerous weapon in the Allied arsenal. The conversation shifts toward the upcoming invasion of Sicily, known as Operation Husky, where the theoretical discussions of Casablanca will be put to the ultimate test of fire and blood. Churchill expresses his desire to see how Patton's philosophy of speed and violence translates to the rugged, mountainous terrain of the Mediterranean island. He is fascinated by the prospect of an American general who rejects the traditional, cautious approach of the British Eighth Army, led by Bernard Montgomery. This sets the stage for a rivalry that will define the Mediterranean theater, a race between two very different styles of command that will be watched closely from the halls of power in London and Washington. In July 1943, the invasion of Sicily begins, and the world watches as the Allied forces claw their way onto the beaches against fierce Italian and German resistance. While the British forces under Montgomery advance with their trademark care and consolidation, Patton's Seventh Army begins a frantic and breathtaking race across the island. Churchill follows the progress of the campaign with mounting excitement, noting the striking difference between the two sectors of the front. The British are securing every hilltop and village with methodical precision, ensuring their supply lines are perfectly established before moving a single mile forward. In contrast, Patton's forces are racing across the Sicilian landscape at a pace that defies every established rule of military logistics, bypassing enemy strongpoints and driving deep into the rear of the Axis positions. When Churchill inquires about the distance the Seventh Army has advanced in its first week, he is told they have covered nearly 100 miles, a feat that elicits disdain from many British officers who view it as reckless. They argue that Patton has left his flanks exposed and outrun his supplies, creating a situation that should lead to a catastrophic counterattack. Yet, as Churchill points out, the results cannot be ignored because Patton is taking his objectives faster than anyone thought possible. Churchill studies the maps in London, seeing the bold red arrows of Patton's advance driving like a dagger through the heart of Sicily, and he muses that Patton does not fight like a modern general at all. He describes him as a cavalry commander who has simply traded horses for tanks, a man who believes that speed itself is a form of protection against the enemy. While his advisors complain that this is not proper military conduct, Churchill interrupts them to highlight that the Germans were not defeated by superior tactics, but by a speed they simply could not match. In a private cable to London, Churchill writes that Patton is the most un-British officer he has ever encountered because he violates every principle of careful warfare. Despite his lack of approval for Patton's methods, Churchill insists that the Allies must study him because he wins quickly, decisively, and with fewer casualties than the more proper commanders. This realization reinforces Churchill's belief that the war requires more than just managers. It requires monsters of the battlefield who are willing to break the rules to achieve victory. As the Sicilian campaign draws to a close, the legend of Patton grows. But so does the controversy surrounding his personal conduct, leading to a crisis that will once again force Churchill and Eisenhower to weigh the value of a warrior against the requirements of civilization. As the heat of the Sicilian sun begins to fade into the cool Mediterranean night of August 1943, a catastrophic storm of a different nature breaks over the Allied high command that threatens to permanently derail the momentum of the war. News reaches Winston Churchill that General George S. Patton has committed what many consider an unforgivable sin by slapping 2 soldiers suffering from battle fatigue in field hospitals. The political repercussions are immediate and explosive as the press and the United States Congress demand Patton's immediate relief from command, arguing that his conduct is a stain on the honor of the American military. Eisenhower finds himself caught in a paralyzing vice between moral outrage and military necessity, admitting to Churchill that he is seriously considering sending Patton home to face the music. Churchill, however, views the situation through the cold, calculating lens of a man who knows that victory is often bought with the service of difficult men. He bluntly tells Eisenhower that while the misconduct is regrettable, they must weigh Patton's actions against his extraordinary value on the battlefield, asking the Supreme Commander if he can truly afford to lose the man who just won Sicily faster than anyone thought possible. Churchill argues with a fierce conviction that politics is temporary and that this war will not be won by diplomatic niceties, but by commanders who possess the rare and brutal ability to win battles. He challenges Eisenhower to name a single other commander who can achieve what Patton does, and when Eisenhower remains silent, Churchill delivers his definitive verdict. He advises Eisenhower to punish Patton, humiliate him, and force him to apologize. But under no circumstances should he be removed from command because his unique brand of fire will be essential for the upcoming invasion of Europe. Churchill famously defends his position by stating that Patton is a bastard, but he is a brilliant bastard. And in the high-stakes gamble of world war, he would choose a brilliant bastard over a pleasant mediocrity every single time. Eisenhower eventually follows this sage advice, opting to keep Patton on the sidelines temporarily, a decision that Churchill believes protects the very possibility of victory in the dark days ahead. The spring of 1944 brings the planning for Operation Overlord to a fever pitch, and with it comes the most elaborate deception plan in military history, Operation Fortitude. The Allies need to convince the German High Command that the primary invasion will strike at the Pas de Calais rather than the beaches of Normandy, and they realize they need a commander the Germans fear and respect above all others to lead the fake army group. British intelligence argues that Patton is the only logical choice because the German generals are convinced he is the finest Allied commander and would never believe an invasion could happen without him at the spearhead. Churchill approves the plan immediately, seeing the poetic irony in using Patton's legendary reputation as a psychological weapon against the very enemy he longs to crush. When Eisenhower expresses concern that Patton will despise being used as a decoy, Churchill suggests a masterstroke of manipulation by using the general's own vanity as a weapon. He tells Eisenhower not to reveal the decoy nature of the assignment, but instead to tell Patton he is being saved for the most important mission of all, the decisive blow that will exploit the breakthrough once the invasion begins. The plan works with chilling efficiency as Patton takes command of the fictitious 1st United States Army Group, and German intelligence swallows the bait completely, keeping their powerful reserves pinned down at Calais while the real invasion ships move toward Normandy. Churchill later tells his staff that Patton was too important to be a decoy in his own mind, so they simply convinced him he was too important not to be one, proving that the man's ego was both his greatest weakness and the Allies' greatest weapon. As the breakout from Normandy finally begins in August 1944, Patton is finally unleashed, and his Third Army begins a race across France that shatters every existing prediction of military speed. They advance hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks, leaving both the enemy and their own supply lines in the dust, as Churchill follows their progress with a sense of pure fascination. He points to the maps in his war room, noting that the Third Army has moved further in 14 days than the more methodical units have moved in 2 months, and he demands to know how Patton is sustaining such a pace. Eisenhower admits that he is baffled by Patton's success, noting that the general is ignoring every established rule of logistics and should have stalled days ago, yet he continues to find fuel and capture German supplies to keep his tanks rolling forward. Churchill concludes that this is not a victory of logistics, but a victory of pure will, as Patton is literally willing his army forward through the sheer force of his overwhelming personality. In his private diary, Churchill writes that Patton is proving warfare is as much an art as it is a science, and that sometimes an artist can only create a masterpiece by breaking every rule in the book. This admiration deepens in December 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge, when the German army launches a desperate counteroffensive that traps American forces in the snowy woods of Bastogne. While other commanders hesitate in the face of the winter storm, Patton performs the impossible by pivoting his entire Third Army 90 degrees and relieving the besieged town in just 48 hours. Churchill's reaction to the Bastogne maneuver is immediate and emphatic, as he cables Eisenhower to call it one of the most remarkable maneuvers in military history. In a powerful speech to Parliament, the Prime Minister defends Patton's unorthodox and risky methods by telling the world to judge commanders by their results rather than their adherence to common sense. Privately, he laments that if Britain had possessed a commander with Patton's audacity in 1940, they might have driven the Germans back across the English Channel before the fall of France. He estimates that Patton is worth 10 full divisions simply because the enemy can never predict what he will do next, a quality that becomes even more apparent during the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945. While General Montgomery spends months meticulously planning a massive, set-piece operation to cross the river, Patton finds a weak point and slips his forces across in a single night with minimal preparation. British officers are furious at what they perceive as Patton upstaging Montgomery, but Churchill simply laughs at the situation, noting that Montgomery is the model of what a modern general should be, while Patton is everything a modern general should not be. He tells his cabinet that he approves of results above all else, and while Montgomery will eventually cross with overwhelming force, Patton has already done it, bringing the end of the war one day closer. In a letter to Eisenhower, Churchill calls Patton impossible and insufferable, yet he predicts that future historians will study Patton's crossing as a model of how pure audacity can win wars. As the German resistance collapses in the spring of 1945, Patton's Third Army races toward Czechoslovakia and Austria, and a new, more dangerous tension begins to emerge between military strategy and political reality. Patton argues vehemently that the Allies should continue their advance into Berlin and Prague before the Soviet Union can occupy them, warning that the Russians will become the next great threat to Western civilization. Eisenhower refuses to authorize the advance because of political agreements made at the highest levels of the Allied government, but Patton takes his case directly to Churchill. Surprisingly, Churchill finds himself in total agreement with Patton's strategic assessment, admitting that while they should militarily continue the advance, they are politically bound by the occupation zones agreed upon by Roosevelt and Stalin. When Patton bluntly states that Roosevelt is making a historic mistake, the surrounding staff is horrified by the insubordination. But Churchill simply nods in somber agreement. He later tells his own staff that Patton sees the coming Cold War more clearly than almost any other politician, and he fears that in 20 years the world will deeply regret not listening to the warrior's warning. The final meeting between these two giants of history takes place in July 1945 in the ruins of Berlin during the Potsdam Conference. They meet privately one evening, and Churchill asks the warrior what he will do now that the war in Europe has been won. Patton admits with a haunting honesty that he is a warrior who does not know how to live in a world of peace, and he confesses his desire for another war, specifically against the Russians, who are already consolidating their grip on Eastern Europe. Churchill acknowledges the truth in Patton's fears, but reminds him that the world is war-weary and has no appetite for another global conflict. He looks at Patton and tells him he is a man out of his time, a throwback to an age of glory and honor that is being replaced by a world of bureaucrats, industrial machines, and ideologies. Patton's hatred for bureaucrats makes Churchill chuckle as they sit in a rare moment of shared silence, two difficult and brilliant men watching the sun set over the defeated capital of the Third Reich. This would be their last encounter, for in December 1945, the world is shocked by the news that General George S. Patton has died from injuries sustained in a mundane car accident in Germany. Churchill is deeply shaken by the news, finding it fundamentally wrong that a man who survived the greatest battles in history should succumb to a traffic accident. He remarks that Patton deserved a warrior's death, leading a charge with a sword in his hand, rather than fading away in a hospital bed. In a personal message to Eisenhower, Churchill mourns the loss of one of the great captains of the war, admitting that while Patton drove them all mad with his recklessness, the man could fight like no other. He delivers a stirring tribute in the British Parliament, describing Patton as the antithesis of the British military tradition, yet precisely the commander the Allies needed to secure victory. He credits Patton's speed and aggression with winning battles that careful tactics never could have touched, and he admits that the world is poorer for the loss of such a complicated leader. Years later, while writing his memoirs, Churchill reflects on Patton as a man who combined the genius of Napoleon with the courage of Alexander the Great and the strategic vision of Caesar. He acknowledges that Patton was profane, politically naive, and occasionally cruel, but he stands by his assessment that the modern world had no place for such a man, even though the war desperately needed him. Churchill remains proud to have known him and grateful that such a ferocious spirit fought on the side of freedom, recognizing that in the final tally of history, results are the only thing that truly matter. The relationship between Churchill and Patton serves as a powerful reminder that history is not made by perfect men, but by flawed, difficult, and impossible individuals who possess the will to change the world through sheer force of character. Eisenhower's initial shock at Churchill calling Patton a pure warrior eventually transformed into a profound understanding of what the Prime Minister saw in that first meeting in Casablanca. Churchill saw a kindred spirit, a man who fought not because it was a job, but because it was his very nature to do so. They were both arrogant, convinced of their own correctness, and absolutely committed to victory at any cost, making them the same type of person despite their different nationalities and roles. As the dust of World War II settled, the names of Churchill and Patton remained inextricably linked as the architects of a victory that defined the 20th century. Their collaboration, born in the smoke-filled rooms of Morocco and tested on the battlefields of Europe, proved that even the most impossible personalities can find common ground when the fate of civilization is at stake. The story of the statesman and the warrior concludes with a legacy of audacity and defiance that continues to inspire and challenge military leaders to this day. Winston Churchill and George S. Patton may have been men out of time, but they were exactly the men that time required to prevent the world from falling into eternal darkness. If Patton had been allowed to keep advancing toward Berlin and Prague as he and Churchill wished, do you believe the Cold War could have been avoided, or would it have triggered World War III immediately? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.